He recognised Grace Walker immediately. Her dead son bore the stamp of her fine features like statues cast from the same mould. The noble-looking gentleman accompanying her was just saying his farewells, judging from his body language. He was too expensively dressed to be a resident of Harlem. White considered waiting for him to depart before bringing horror to her home, but calculated such a companion might be invaluable to help her with the initial shock of her son's untimely death. So he introduced himself, and could see from Grace's expression that she'd read the terrible news he carried. Inside, the apartment was thrifty but spotlessly clean and dignified. It reflected the woman that lived there. Grace Walker had substance about her. White could read the humanity in her face, but it was also marked by the quiet determination of a woman who had had to endure much hardship, worry, and prejudice. The picture of the Virgin Mary that hung upon the kitchen wall told him not only of Grace's religious beliefs, but also fitted the powerful maternal presence that dominated her humble home. However, White thought, even a woman like this would crumble inside at the news he was about to deliver. Sitting around a battered table, White came to the point. It was no use pretending to intelligent folk like these. He spoke quietly and with genuine regret. Mrs. Walker, Mr. Dubois, this morning I was informed of a missing person and shown the photograph you left. I'm afraid I found your son, Joseph, dead last night. He'd been the victim of a homicide. I'm very sorry to have to bring you such news. Dubois spoke first. Grace was still falling down a deep chasm. Are you certain the victim was Joseph, Detective? I am, sir. Officially, I will need somebody to identify Joseph's body. Is there a male member of the family who could do that? Dubois shook his head. Charles, Joseph's father, is away fighting in the war. He was their only child. I met the young man briefly. I don't suppose that's good enough to suffice, but I can accompany Grace. I would like to do so. Can it wait a while, Detective? If you are sure and it's a formality, it might be best to let Grace prepare herself first. At this, Mrs. Walker anchored herself. Looking between both of the gentlemen, she quietly asserted her own wishes. If my boy child has been taken, then I want to see him and say my goodbyes. I have one man risking his life thousands of miles away for goodness knows what. Let me be close to my boy. I dreaded facing death. I thought it would arrive in a telegram from overseas. Instead, you came. White leaned in, his hands cupped together on the table. He looked directly at Grace Walker. I'm sorry. I wish I had different news for you. I have a daughter myself. I can't imagine how I'd feel if I was dealt this kind of blow. As he said the words, the detective felt a pain in his chest as he realised he was, in a less permanent way, facing the removal of his only child. Joseph's murder was something much worse, though, and as she sat there distraught at her kitchen table, Grace had White see a whole other level of loss. Nevertheless, there was something in his face, something in his tone that struck a chord with both Grace and Dubois. With gentle and tentative assent, the trio set out from the apartment to take the dreaded journey to the city morgue. Except when they'd walked down the front steps, a hostile crowd had gathered around White's automobile. The leader of the mob was tall and skinny. He had a young man's body but an old man's face that bore a livid pink scar across one cheek. Instinctively, White tensed up for a battle. He believed the hand the young man kept in his pocket concealed a weapon that he was fully prepared to use. What the hell business this white man got with you, Mrs. Walker? He a lawman? You in Harlem now, lawman. You better watch how you be treating black folks down here in this neighborhood. Dubois placed himself strategically between the maverick young man and the uncompromising cop. He seemed perfectly calm, but also at least a foot taller than just a moment ago. In a voice that was both mellifluous and authoritative, he said, No need for confrontation here. Mr. White is helping us in a difficult time. Mrs. Walker has just lost her son, so if you would show her the respect of letting us all pass, that would be greatly appreciated. The youth was unsettled by the educated talk and civility of Dubois, but he still miscalculated the situation. Perhaps it was the issue of colour that blinded him to the gravitas of the gentleman's words, that or a violent lust to hit out at the world and the injustices he felt. Mr. White? You mean the man come down here wearing his name like a flag to stick into the black soil like another colonizer? What are you, his pathfinder? It was not a joke, and the youth's eyes blazed with anger. Grace Walker stepped forward. Young man, I have a husband at war, and a boy wouldn't harm a fly lying dead. If you want to cause trouble, do it somewhere else. Or so help me God, I will slap you so hard to make your head spin. You ain't fit to lick their boots, and I got an anger rising in me like a tornado, so step aside. For the first time, the youth actually took in the grieving mother. Grace Walker was 5'0", but she was an avalanche of hurt and pain just looking for a place to demolish. He stepped out of their way, eyeing White with malice. The car clattered off for its awkward destination, and the tension was only broken a little by Dubois' statement. Well, truth be told, Grace, I believe I was more frightened of what you might have done to him than of what he might have done to us. I'm sure I'm glad to be your friend and not your enemy. In his rearview mirror, White could see Mrs. Walker still staring down the evil in the world. It was a stare that would turn her eyes into tunnels as she identified her only son's body at the morgue.